landed at Lahore Airport in the middle of the night. Airport in the middle of the night, frightening, and lots of police, lots of guards. And I was picked up, into Lahore, which is very close to Kashmir. Then we drove to Islamabad, and we went out to dinner in an open square, and we're eating the best chicken you will ever eat in your life. I've eaten, and families are playing, and people are smiling, and I'm thinking, this is the terrorist state. This is the state of concern. This is the place that is so dangerous. And by the way, the only people that weren't on the street were the Americans, who are hunkered down in their embassies and consulates, forbidden to walk on the street. So from that first couple of hours in Pakistan, and I forget how many times I've been to Pakistan, it's just learning and opening up opportunities. So Bari is here because he attended a giant conference. The UN Secretary General was there, lots of heads of states were there. It was a big, powerful meeting in Sendai talking about disaster relief, and and he came down here, especially at a long distance from Sendai and expensive as well, to come down. I invited him to speak in this class. At 3 o'clock, there's another presentation because Alia Bano is here as well. And she works on community building and with women focus groups and empowerment issues and capacity issues. And she'll be talking at 3 o'clock downstairs on the second floor. So I think I've wasted about 4 minutes. I'll give the floor over to Mr. Badi. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. You're welcome. It's my honor to share my thoughts with you about my work and about my country and people. Before I talk about Pakistan, I would like to ask 2 questions for you. How many of you have ever voted in elections? And the second question is, how often do you use your right to disagree or to resist things which you don't like? How often?
Especially in this country.
Well, this is freedom, because in my view, we need to differentiate between freedom and democracy. If we don't have a freedom, we can't have a democratic system. And that's a prerequisite to have any functional democracy anywhere in the world. In many countries in the world, including my country, we have a facade of democracy, but we have very little freedom. If we do use our freedom, there is no guarantee that you will be free afterwards. You may suffer. Pakistan, as you may know, 97% people are Muslim. And there has been a lot of debate and discussion whether democracy can flourish in a country where a large majority of the population is Muslim. There has been a debate between whether Islam allows democracy or not. Is democracy compatible with democracy, or liberal democracy, or social democracy, whatever you may call it? This debate is going on within the Muslim world, and also a lot of scholars who are interested in democracy in the Muslim world. There are some scholars who will say that this is not possible, because Muslims tend to think collectively, while liberal democracy believes in individual freedom. And because Muslim societies believe in collective action, therefore this individual freedom may not be available or not I personally believe that's nonsense. We have seen uprisings in Tunisia, in Egypt, and my own country has seen similar uprisings in the past. 1968, we had a massive democratic movement, military dictator was overthrown. Then in 2007 and 8, there was a prolonged movement against a military dictator. And in 1983 as well, there was a democratic movement against another dictator. So I don't think that the scholars who have been arguing that the democracy cannot take roots in the Muslim society is very difficult to prove. This is possible because every human being has this inherent tendency to disagree, and this is part of our human beings, and that's why we have so much diversity in the world. Otherwise, we would have been created in a similar way. So we have diversity in the nature. We have even there are 1001 colors of shades of green. If you look at any garden or orchard, and also we have difference of opinions. We disagree every day. We disagree with our fathers, with our parents, with our elder brothers. We disagree with our teachers. But there are forces, of course, who don't like this. They tend to streamline everybody else the way they think, and such forces are very much present in Pakistan too. And interestingly, such forces have been always supported by the Western governments. And that's like for Saudi Arabia, for Saudi Arabian society, you know that women can't even drive a car. But American foreign policy would never criticize that. But if something happens in China, there is a lot of women crime. So these double standards need to be understood why. This is very important. Anyway, so I'm borrowing these 4 elements of democracy from a scholar. Any democracy must have at least these 4 elements. One is a political system which allows to choose and to replace a government with free and fair elections. That's very, very important. The second is active participation of the people as citizens in politics through political parties or civil society and civic life. The third is protection of human rights of all citizens. When we say all citizens, it means every citizen. Women, men, various ethnic groups, disabled, powerful, so everybody must be treated equally. And of course, the rule of law. A rule of law means rule of law. If a rich man or a woman violates the law, he or she should be punished. But these 4 conditions are not fulfilled in many democratic countries. And Pakistan is a very good example. And that's why we have been, of course, I belong to an NGO which is supposed to be apolitical. But we believe that we can't remain apolitical, we must be political. And I mean political with capital P, not small. We need to take a position. So, very briefly, power and wealth in Pakistan, maybe like America, is concentrated in a few hands. 65% of our farmland is owned by 15% of big landlords. More than 70% of our National Assembly constituencies fall in rural areas. That That means that if land is owned by big landlords, 65% of the farmland is owned by 15%, and in most cases, the same big landlords are sitting in our assemblies. So they control more than 70% of the decision-making largest body, which is National Assembly and Senate of Pakistan, is controlled by these big landlords, and they have very close relationship with big business and military generals. And a lot of military generals are given state land, so they also become feudal in their behavior. So there is organic relationship between feudals, businessmen, politicians, and we nowadays, since neoliberal ideology is being indoctrinated all over the world, we talk a lot about private-public partnership. If you read the UN documents, this has been propagated and indoctrinated, and it has become like a sacred ideology. Recently, I was in Bangkok. UN big boss of UN, one of the UN agencies, delivered a long lecture on private-public partnership. I said, private sector has captured the public sector because 80% MPs in Pakistan have their own firms. So where is the partnership? So the partnership between private and public doesn't exist in Pakistan. It may exist in England, but I don't know, because the private sector through lobbying controls, in many democratic countries, they also control decision making. So there is a conflict of interest. So it may damage democracy. And in recent debate in the European Union, now, if you do follow the debate in Europe, a lot of now people have been questioning that the European Parliament has nothing to do with any decision making. It's basically European Commission and its commissioners who takes decisions, who make decisions, and the European Parliament, in fact, most of the time endorses those decisions. So the democracy is in fact being weakened even in Europe, according to some scholars. So, and then issue of gender is very important. 5% women own any asset or land in Pakistan. We did a baseline study in Pakistan. We asked two questions. The first question was, does Islam give women right to inheritance, to inherit land or assets from father, from husband? Everybody said yes. We asked the second question, do Muslims follow this Islamic instruction? A large majority said yes. So because this inheritance, because there is a lot of these mullahs, clergy in Pakistan have been saying, oh, Islam gives equal rights to women. Islam believes in democracy. Islam believes in women's rights. But I would always ask, do you think Muslims do this? Do you do it? You are a mullah. You are a custodian of this religion. Did you transfer right to your daughter at the time when she was married off? They don't do it. They violate it. So as a result of that, only 5% women own any asset in Pakistan, while 67% men own some assets. We have cell phones nowadays. Only 7% women own cell phone in Pakistan, while about more than 60% men have cell phones. They have access to information. And this is very important, that how we can bridge this gender gap. So now, as a result of this total control, one is a male, second is rich, feudal, big business, and as a result of that, there is nobody who can make these powerful people accountable. And accountability is if there is no accountability, then it means there is no freedom. Because people know that if they use their freedom, they may not be free afterwards. They may be attacked, if not prison, or they may lose, their animals may be stolen. This happens in our villages. If you oppose your feudal or disagree with him, if you don't vote for him, next day your animals would be stolen. And animals are like cash, very important for farmers. So you go to his house, you apologize, and then you get your animals back. A friend of us who was active in minimum wage rates movement, he was hit with 5 bullets in 1 p.m. in a crowded street. And we have been making a lot of noises, but culprits have not been arrested. It happened last year. All been to that city as well. But we have to do it. We have to take these risks. So as a result of that, we have very poor governance. Poverty is spreading. According to recent studies, 34% people live below poverty line. In 2006, it was only 17%. So more people have fallen below the poverty line. And it's absolute poverty. It's not like $2. It's even less than that. Deprivations. UNDP has conducted a study and found out that about 54% Pakistanis are deprived of multiple deprivations. No access to education, no access to health facilities, no access to sanitation. So there is a widespread deprivation, no justice. If you have a trouble with a powerful person, of course, you can, instead of hiring, we have a joke that instead of hiring a good lawyer, hire the judge. You pay some money to the judge, you win the case. Who has the more money? Who is more powerful? Who has more money will buy the judge. So as a result of that, Pakistan, within South Asian countries, has highest mortality rate among women, pregnant women and infants, even more than Nepal. But one thing which is happening now, because of this situation, the ruling parties don't have any legitimacy. So they come to power through vote, majority vote, but they still lack legitimacy because they don't implement their promises which they made during the elections. So there is a serious crisis of legitimacy in the country. And this is very important to realize because we believe that if there is a crisis of legitimacy, the ruling party or the rulers have no moral authority, so they are very weak. And we as NGO, but also we work with laborers, we work with women, we work on human rights issues. We are trying to fully utilize this realization that the rulers and the officials lack legitimacy, and they know it, that they are not popular. And this is a great strength. This gives us a lot of strength to fight back and to take this risk, which was not the case in the 80s when Ziaul Haq was in power, this was not the case. But now, because of repeated movements, especially during 2007 and 8, when Musharraf was in power, this prolonged movement which continued for 2 years in Pakistan, we managed to create this space. But as Paul mentioned, Pakistan is notorious for producing terrorists. Every terrorist who is active anywhere in the world has some link. Either he was trained in Pakistan or on the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. So, therefore, no movement is supported by any foreign country, because they think let the regime first get rid of the terrorists. But we argue that unless we have good governance, rule of law, these terrorists would continue using that space as well. So it's a very difficult situation for us, because in the name of war against terrorism, a lot of human rights are being violated as well. But this terrorism is very important to understand, was never there. It was generated when Soviets invaded Afghanistan, and Reagan, the USA president, and supported Ziaullah, who was a military dictator in Pakistan, they initiated jihad. So Al Qaeda was also was a product of former jihadis. ISIS or ISIL, which is now a serious problem in Syria and Iraq, have links with the Afghan jihad. So this is really strange for us to understand how the ruler of Western powers, where we have democracy, rule of law, good governance, everything, they can support such evil groups in the name of jihad. Libya was, of course, Gaddafi was a dictator. Saddam Hussein was a dictator. Bashar al-Assad is also a dictator. But at least they were not allowing their country or people to become terrorists. With the invasion of Iraq and overthrow of Gaddafi, these people thought, oh, there is a huge gap, there is a huge vacuum, we should use this. Now, it's a big problem. And Pakistan is suffering from this as well. But there is a good news as well. We have about 82,000 registered NGOs in Pakistan, and about 600,000 people work with them. This is a great step. We have more than 200,000 professional associations, like Sweepers Association, Barbers Association, Bar Councils, Engineering Council, collective bargaining agents, trade unions. So according to some estimates, there are about 200,000 registered professional groups, which is a great step. And they are membership based. They hold their elections almost every year. But there is no link between these civil society groups and political society. Political society means political parties have no linkages with these groups. We don't have strong trade unions, we don't have student unions, because they were banned a long time ago. But still these professional groups are there. In every city, whether it's a small city or a big city. And this is, in my view, is a great capital, social capital, and also this can be transformed into political capital, provided we, the civil society and these professional groups decide, like it happened in some Latin American countries, where such groups finally thought that let's transform this movement into a political movement. It happened in India recently. You might have heard about Aam Aadmi Party, which won almost 97% seats in the New Delhi state elections. This was an anti-corruption movement. About 6 years back, then they decided that we can't always be acting as a pressure group. We must capture power. So the Aam Aadmi Party means the ordinary person's party in English. So Aam Aadmi Party contested elections recently, and out of 70 assembly seats, they won 67. Congress was wiped out, and the BJP could win all the 3 seats. So this is what I think is happening, because since the new liberal ideology was promoted, gradually civil society was separated from political society. In Europe and in many other countries, democracy deepened when professional groups, when trade unions converted themselves into political parties, like Labour Party of UK or Social Democratic parties in Europe. The Labour movement decided that instead of acting all the time as a pressure group, we need to transform into political party. We need to capture power. So I think this process, we are trying our best to transform this process as well in Pakistan. We have a very free media, absolutely free media. We have about 10 English newspapers. We have about 70 Urdu and various local languages papers are printed in Pakistan every day. We have more than 110 periodicals published every week or every month. And then we have TV channels. We have free judiciary because of the 2000 and 2007 and 8 movement. The judiciary has become very free. So there is very little influence of the ruling party over judiciary. So I think we are gradually, despite all these problems, somehow all the ingredients are developing to transform Pakistan into a peaceful and democratic country. In my view, we have better chances to become more democratic than India, because if you compare Indian press with Pakistani press is more critical of its foreign policy, of its interior policy. We have a problem in Balochistan, which is the largest province area-wise. Our papers, op-ed article, you would find very critical of government policy towards Balochistan, but you would hardly find any articles in Indian press on Kashmir issue. This is almost a similar kind of situation. So, I would like to now wind up by saying this, that we need to change the image of Pakistan, because it's not only terrorism, but our terrorism has roots in Washington DC, and this could be eliminated if I think the powers, people who control power in Washington, in London, or in Paris, or in Saudi Arabia and in Pakistan, they stop playing proxy wars, and we need to expose this. So then we can, and we also expect that these powers must resolve all the outstanding conflicts, disputes like Kashmir, like Cyprus, like Palestine, or any other dispute between two countries, whether it is between Japan or China. So I think these things are very important, but the most important thing is that the capital, social capital, which is being grown up in Pakistan, we need to gel it. We need to galvanize it in order to transform Pakistan. Because that's very critical. We are a nuclear power. And it's dangerous. We can't continue with terrorism. We can't allow any terrorists in Pakistan. Because having nuclear bombs, not 110 nuclear bombs we have, it's very dangerous. And you are going to visit Hiroshima. You will understand that. How dangerous this weapon is. So, thank you very much for listening to me, and thank you, Paul, for inviting me. If you have any
questions?
Yes.
You speak a lot about democracy and development. A lot of people, when they look at Egypt and the argument kind of that Sisi makes, that in order for democracy to truly take place, you need first security. You need development and security before you can have democracy. What do you say to that argument?
Can you take some more questions that I can respond? Yes, please.
You talk a lot about sort of civil society and political movements needing more legitimacy in Pakistan. What do you think about Imran Khan and the PTI, and sort of, would you see that as an avenue perhaps for a political movement that could gain legitimacy? And then I guess sort of an addendum to that would be Imran Khan's stance on how to deal with the terrorism problem in Pakistan.
Yes.
Do you think Islam is a democracy?
Sorry?
Do you think it's a possible democracy with Islam?
Okay. Well,
Maybe one, can I do
yeah,
that?
please.
When you're in the countryside,
Yeah.
when you're in the rural areas, do you find people to be radicalized? Do you find them to be pro-Taliban, or do you find extremism in the countryside among the rural population?
Well, I think let me, this is very interesting. I can start with your question. You know, Pakistan was part of India, and Bangladesh was too. Our country, well, India was ruled by invaders for centuries. Muslim invaders ruled India for 1,000 years. It's not a small period. Delhi remained a non-Muslim majority city. Then these invaders were never interested to convert people to Islam. Least interested. Similarly, Lahore, which is one of the largest cities of United India. Then the British came. The first opposition to the British rule came from clergy and nobility. These mullahs opposed the British occupation, but they never used violence. Now, it's very important that why they would go along with Jinnah, who would eat egg and bacon every morning, drink whiskey every evening. So they voted for him and did not support the mullahs. And there were 5 or 6 religious parties in United India. They did not opt for that. So I'm also answering your question, because whenever the chance was given to Muslims, they voted for secular parties. They never voted for religious parties, because they believe that we need democracy, and democracy is the only way forward. So this debate about Islam and democracy, in my view, doesn't hold any ground when you probe it properly. I work in hundreds of villages. I yet to meet any extremist or Taliban And I work in an area which is being portrayed as the next trouble area as far as the Taliban uprising is concerned. South Punjab. I have never met any extremist or Taliban. Rather, many people don't even know who are these Taliban. They never heard of this word. And they in a village, Shias and Sunnis go to the same mosque. Can you think that a Catholic and Protestant could go to the same church? These Shias and Sunnis, they go to the same mosque. They are related to each other. They participate and attend funerals of each other. So they share sorrow, they share happiness and joyness together. So this is not like extremism is not part of our psyche. It's not in our genes. In fact, these people who are active since Afghan Jihad were trained. The money came even from Israel. The money went from China, from Saudi Arabia, from Washington. So these people were trained, indoctrinated, and now they have become problem for everybody. So I don't think so that the ordinary people, men and women, would go for extremist ideology or they would vote for them. The second, your question was about Imran Khan. Of course, currently he is the most popular leader. If we have elections tomorrow, he may sweep the elections. But his alliance with Jamaat Islami in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province is problematic. To what extent Jamaat Islami, who has strong links with Al Qaeda, and most of the Al Qaeda people who were arrested in Pakistan were found hiding in Jamaat Islami high officials' houses. So Imran Khan has a very close relationship with Jamaat Islami, which can cause trouble. But I think because Jamaat Islami doesn't have very strong presence in the public, particularly in Punjab. Jamaat Islami has some following in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which used to be called Northwest Province before. But Imran Khan is, I would say, because he personally is very honest man. He seems to be very serious in improving rule of law in Pakistan. So there is some hope, and a lot of people are being attracted by his program, and some of the civil society may also go along with him. But since some big business and big feudals have joined his party, in my view, he may not be able to deliver if he comes to power. So people like me should be fully prepared that if he fails, the vacuum is not filled by the Taliban or the extremist groups. So the task is even more urgent, because in my view, if he has people who remain in power for so many times, they switch sides, joining his party, and of course they will try to sabotage what he wants to reform in Pakistan. So his reform agenda can be undermined by his own party people, and it happened in the 1970s when Bhutto came to power, and all these big feudals and businessmen joined him and sabotaged the whole reform. This can happen again. Regarding this issue of Egypt, whether the security, stability and development is a prerequisite for any democratic development, I don't think that's important, because if there is a stability and when there is no democracy, look at China. Because you don't allow normal process of change. There is no freedom. You don't channelize that energy. So that energy keeps on building up, boiling up, and it's like earthquake. When you don't have that safety walls in the system, then it happens what had happened in Egypt. It can happen again. And I'm sure this would happen again. Like change never comes with one go. It happened. We know that what happened in Europe. We had French Revolution. Napoleon Bonaparte comes back. He reintroduces, of course, feudalism but in a different manner. So this, we call it in Urdu paso pesh. You one step forward, two step backward, as Lenin had said once. This is a way to move forward. But I'm sure that there would be another uprising in Egypt and in the Arab world, because that capital is there. And if you may go to these area countries, you can feel that energy, that anger is there. And also there is infighting between Saudi Arabia and Qatar as well on Egypt. And then we should not ignore how these Sunni extremist rulers are using anti-Shia politics and allying with Israel, and also supporting Israeli policies which nobody can support. So that's exposing these Sunni rulers as well. So Iran is using that vacuum moving forward, and the Iranian regime is a dictatorial regime. So, and mullahs are ruling. This is perhaps the only country where mullahs are ruling the country. So in my view, this in the so-called Muslim world, the real democratic forces need to have support from the West and from the Western civil society more than the Western powers. There is a need to have a global network for further democratization in the Middle East and in South Asia as well. And that's the only peaceful way to move forward. If you stop that, then of course there would be bloodbath, and we may have less stability and less development. If I may explain or confuse you more.
So what's your relationship with the Americans? Not me, but the American government.
I don't take their money.
Okay.
There's a lot of money in Pakistan from USAID. I never take their money directly. But I'm not against American people. American people are great. All is great friends. I know, and I have so many American friends. I'm talking about, I have no problem with Bush even. I'm against his foreign policy. So it's not personal, it's policies. So I lived in England for 10 years, where I was wanted by a military dictator in Pakistan. So England is like my second home. So it's not, I should not hate anybody. But I have the right to disagree with policies, and if I disagree, I disagree publicly.
You kind of sound like you liked the English way of doing things, the English government, how it works. Do you want Pakistan to become a welfare society, or would you rather see them as just moving one step at a time towards? What do you hope the goal for Pakistan is? What do you dream of?
what I struggle, what I strive for is not a welfare state. That may take time. A state where people can participate in decision making, where we have a rule of law, where we can argue without fighting. So that's my first step. And let the people decide whether they wanted to have a welfare state or a social state. So that leave it to the people. But we must not allow mullahs, we must not allow the feudal to hijack the Pakistani state and extract all the surplus, send it abroad to Dubai or to Geneva. So we must stop that. So that's the first task. And with that, things will definitely improve. And once we have a free debate, because sometimes you have a debate, but the debate is being controlled. I remember very well in 1989 when the senior Bush attacked Iraq. In England, we did not have free debate because they would, all these big anchors would invite one person who was against the invasion and 6 people who were in favor of the invasion. So it was like very blatant propaganda, but did in a very subtle way, where you give some right to opposition as well. We need a free debate where people can debate and it's not manipulated.
How do you plan on obtaining that?
Well, we are trying to build a movement because I just mentioned we have 200,000 special interest associations. We are trying to bring them together. We have these NGO activists, human rights activists. We have to galvanize this force together and trying to formulate a vision for that. So that's the only way. There's no other way.
How is the government or school organizations educating young people and dissuading them from joining terrorist organizations? Is there any organization doing that kind of thing?
That's really excellent. Could you follow up? Sorry, really good about how the Nobel Prize winner was first perceived before she was a Nobel Prize winner?
Malala.
Yeah, Malala.
It's a very interesting question because what was happening in Pakistan for a long time, since jihad in Afghanistan. We changed everything. We changed our textbooks. And we inserted hate material, like against Hindus, against Christians. So now, the government, because you might have heard about that 146 children were killed on 16th of December, and that became like a turning point in Pakistan. The military has now decided that the terrorists must be eliminated from Pakistan. And then there was a lot of pressure from civil society groups that killing terrorists is not enough. We have to get rid of those factors and resources and where they are taking place. We should remove everything from the society. So now the government has formed a group which is now reviewing all the books, textbooks. So all this material is going to be deleted. Now you can't use mosque through loudspeaker. That has been banned now. So about 5 or 6 steps have been taken recently after this school was attacked. Things are getting little better, and I am hopeful that more space will be created. But that's not enough. We also need to use that space. Regarding Malala, like a few months back, nobody was willing to listen anything good about Malala. But now things have changed. So Malala was a young girl whose her father was also very active. I know her father very well. And even during when the Taliban had complete control in that particular district, which is called Swat, she remained very active during that period as well. And now she is an icon in Pakistan. People are giving their daughters now name Malala, so the Malala name has become popular. So there is a change now, and some positive steps have been taken, and we need to consolidate those steps, mature those steps.
Ever since this election, Ashraf Ghani's he's made it a priority to closing ties between Afghanistan and Pakistan because he sees Pakistan as very critical to Afghanistan's future. Could you comment on Afghanistan-Pakistani relations moving forward?
Yeah, I think so. Between Afghanistan and Pakistan, things have changed since this school was attacked. The same day, our army chief rushed to Afghanistan because the group which attacked the school was based in Afghanistan. And since then, and also with Karzai going out of power, it now appears to most of the commentators in Pakistan that both Afghanistan and Pakistan have agreed that they would not give any safe haven, provide any safe haven to these extremist groups. So Pakistan has also got rid of most of the anti-Afghan Taliban groups, and similarly, Afghanistan is also taking some measures, positive measures. So, in my view, that is a very positive development, and I hope that will continue. That's very, very positive. So, what I said earlier on, and this is going to change situation in Pakistan.
Yeah. How do you create a strong civil society, or how do you stimulate people to participate more?
Very simple. Paul and myself were talking about it. It's, go to them, because nobody goes to them. If you go to them and you sit with them, listen to them, and if they have problems and they want to solve, help them. And once you stand with them and shoulder to shoulder take a position, then they would start trusting. So you have to build your trust, that you are not here to take something out of them, because that's what the bourgeois politicians do. But you need to build this trust, and in order to build trust, you need to sacrifice. You have to sacrifice your time, you have to sacrifice your sometimes freedom as well. And I'm saying this because I try to practice this, and whenever we do it, we have very fantastic response from it happened in recent movement. We started a minimum wage movement. These people who who had never thought that they would get the minimum wage rates, which are announced by government, but now they are getting it. But that's not enough, because that's trade unionism. But then you have to transform them as well, that look, you can achieve this, but how many other rights are being violated? You have no school in your area. You pay taxes, but you don't get anything in return. And the reason is because you vote for somebody who is not going to protect your rights. He is going to have more money out of your taxes. So that's the way I will do it. I don't think there is another way to do it. You have to go to the people.
Could you talk a little bit about your work with textile workers?
Yeah, this was like
this is
minimum wages, because we took up this issue that minimum wages, which are announced every year by government, after looking at about 18 factors, indicators like inflation and things like that, but never implemented in the past. It is still not implemented all over Pakistan, but in those districts where the movement is strong, the rate has gone up. So in other now districts, this news is spreading. So people are approaching us. So we are telling them, look, you have to come out. You have to have a sit-in. You have to, you can't get your right without sacrificing something. So it's very strong. A lot of women have emerged as leaders from these groups.
One of the concerns I hear is like the nuclear weapons would fall into the wrong hands. How vulnerable would you say that the weapons are to fall into the wrong hands?
Well, that's what we hear and what we little information have. I could say that's not easy, because it's not just Pakistan, but international community also regularly monitor that. How these weapons are being protected from outside, like American government.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who would be in charge of, let's say, hopefully never, but using them in the government, or I mean, who's in charge now of the weapon?
Military.
Americans.
No, military.
Oh, military.
Pakistan military.
Okay.
Yeah, but even like every general is not allowed to go there. Only those who are assigned, only they can even visit. Even one visit is approved by maybe by 10 or 11 people. So in that way, it's being enforced rigorously. But then of course it's a dangerous situation. Within the army, there are elements who don't believe in this, that they believe that if America has a atomic bomb, then we should have. So, but so far, we are confident that these nuclear bombs are protected and completely insulated from outside.
Back to that question, I'm always intrigued, and we work a lot together, and Alia's here as well. In a place like Pakistan, Islamic society, only 5% of women have a property. How do you go into a village and organize women? I show up. You show up. We've shown up. How do you? I only show up after you've already done the work. But how do you do that?
Well, I think it's, first we need to go there. When we go there, we realize that what we have like conceived about our conception about these societies was different. So we immediately feel that is wrong, because you would hardly find women in rural areas wearing hijab. In villages, women are free to go out. They work in the fields. They rear animals. They don't do any kind of, they don't put burqa, veil, on their heads and faces. Of course, there is a segregation. But if you can build trust with them, which is important, then that barrier is gone. You can have a dialogue with them. I remember in '92 or '93 perhaps, beginning of '93, I went to this area and we after the floods, and this village was completely washed away. So I went to this village. I said, I have come here. How I could help you? So about 120 people, men turned up. I said, where are your women? I said, our women don't need foreigners, outsiders. I said, I can bring my female staff, but unless we hear your women, we are not going to do any work in your village. And they said, come tomorrow again. So we went tomorrow. There were more women than men. And we had a debate whether we should build houses for you or we should build a dike around the village. Because this village was right next to a river. So most women, in fact, they said, build the embankment. We don't need houses. Of course, women for women, privacy is very more crucial than men. And we build houses in all other villages except this village. Because one woman said that if we have this dike around our village, our thatched house would survive because the water would not enter. So we wanted to solve this issue for next decades. If we have houses, we are next to the river, and water would come again and our houses would be washed. So we built the embankment. We listened to women, and men said, fine, if our women are saying this, we accept it. So since then, there was, whenever I would go to that village, people would take me to their homes, and women would also shake hands. So the whole notion, what even educated Pakistanis living in cities, they have misconceived ideas about our own culture. And when in 2001 local government elections were announced, and 33% quota was reserved for women, all these women who were active in community work, they wanted to contest elections. And they held village meetings, and they decided that who would contest from this village. And the landlord nominated his candidate as well. And these villagers, they decided that this woman would contest from our side, and they defeated landlord's candidate in that area. Because these women had emerged, they had worked a lot in the community, they contributed a lot, they emerged as leaders, and they thought they are the best leaders. So most of them won the election.
And they had no I'm sorry.
I just want to quickly add into it that despite of that there is a little segregation and women they don't cover themselves, but still initially when you go into the communities, first of all you have to build a trust with your men, like by Bari said earlier, so when you're working with the men, you ask them why you are there. So once you are working with the women, so women there, they suddenly explore that new space because they have never been a part of decision making ever before. So why our civil society or the NGO workers become a part of this decision making, and they start enjoying that freedom and space. So the women, the rural women, have a very strong potential to be strong leaders, and you cannot easily craft them. And once we have done all this work, they were a part of project, and unfortunately, all NGOs are donor dependent. So when money ended, I always receive a call from those women. They always want us to come back, to work with them, to assist them. So they have a potential to be a stronger leader than men in Pakistan. And there are women like that.
Success of the system is dependent on trust without manipulation, but do there need to be adjustments for accountability to the system made to prevent manipulation? Yeah. Okay, so the system, like democratic system, relies on the trust you're talking about building to best like serve people, but without manipulation or corruption, or like individual gain. So don't there need to be adjustments made to the system in regards to accountability in order to prevent manipulation?
Well, I think it's in my view, democracy is a work in progress all the time. And we talk a lot about transparency, because if things are transparent, then it's difficult to manipulate. And if things are transparent, it's ultimately you build a trust as well. And that's why the governments and officials tend to hide things. The more they hide, the more they lose trust. They lose confidence. So so therefore it's very important that you keep on demanding transparency, information, and if you find that they're trying to hide something, then it's basically it's a tool to expose their manipulations. So it's an ongoing process. But of course, civil society or a political society has less stamina than the state, because state has unlimited resources, unlimited human and financial resources to exhaust you. So consistency is very important, and if you give up soon because you know it's difficult to get this information, and then you move to another project, then of course things would never improve. But if you keep on pushing for information and transparency, things will get better, especially in a country like Pakistan, where as I mentioned earlier on, because they are not popular, they lack that legitimacy, because they keep on manipulating everything. I was mentioning in Sendai that one bridge was built in Pakistan, which has created, in fact, disaster because of its faulty design. And when I checked with the chief engineer, he said, "This is worldwide practice." I was coming to your university and I was looking at a bridge on the river, and the bridge is wider than the river. But in Pakistan, bridges are very narrow, and the river is 11 kilometers wide and the bridge is 1 kilometer long. It would create trouble, of course. With every flood season, it would act as a bottleneck. So all the people upstream of that bridge would be inundated. So last year, that the road leading to that bridge In fact, that road was built inside the river, so it stopped all the flow. So as a result of that, the neighboring city was in danger. So they dynamited this road because then water could flow. So now, for 2 months, they were not willing to give this information. Finally, we got the information, but then I'm not a technical person. So I started checking on web what the size of a bridge to the size of a river should be. So we are still doing that because we need to get that technical information in order to make them accountable, because otherwise this bridge will remain there and it act always as a hazard, and a normal flood would become a disaster every second year. So this is what we need.
You said that there's a large free media in Pakistan, and considering the illegitimacy of their leaders, I'm sure they covered on a lot of points you've mentioned today. So what does this say about the leaders? Are they confident that even though the people are getting this information, they won't do anything about it, or are they not? Or are they weak, so they cannot control the media? What does this say about the leaders?
Well, again, media is of course free, but not independent. Because media houses are controlled by big business, almost everywhere. So we need to, as I said, it's a work in progress all the time. It's free but not independent. So the media has a politics sector. Regarding Imran Khan's question, the media was split right in the middle. Half channels were supporting Imran Khan, other halves were opposing him. And you could see that it was blatant. The support was blind and the opposition was blind. So they were not bothered about keeping the balance. Now what we are struggling is that how we can influence the people's agenda to these channels. And some channels are more like pro-people than others. So this is a continuous struggle that media is free. They can do whatever they want to do. They can manipulate things. Like when Malala was given first time nominated for Nobel Prize, the media campaigned against her. Her father had written a book, and that book was used as a propaganda tool against her and her father. So it was quite difficult to defend that, and we were getting threats because if we would open our mouth, so then we would get threats. But finally, they decided, the media thought that she has become powerful and she has become very popular, and they can't continue with this. So that gradually things changed. But of course, this is an ongoing battle. I remember when in 2002, Iraq was invented. 2004. I could not see any difference between CNN and BBC and Fox News. It became all same. So there was very little difference. So when they have their strategic interest, so they forget about ethics. And we should know that. And we need to inform citizens as well, because it happens. And that is a time when you must not be influenced by their propaganda. You must have some ability to understand what's going on.
You know, we're not finished yet. We have about 10 minutes, but you know, I've never heard anyone except you really, talk about the weakness of religious parties, how people always, they tend to vote for secular parties. I mean, you have the research. How come Western analysts are talking about this almost monolithic Islam, which can't democratize? How come we don't hear another side of exactly what you said?
Well, I can cite here, and you can visit Pakistan Election Commission website as well. The data is available. In last election, we had general elections in 2013. Religious parties did not get even 2% of the total vote. Similarly, in 2008, maybe they got 4% vote. So, in fact, in 2002, they got more votes because Musharraf helped them, the military general at that time. But in 1970, it was Pakistan People's Party who won in West Pakistan, different Pakistan, and in Bangladesh, which at that time was East Pakistan, Awami League won all the seats except one. Jamaat Islami did not win a single seat. In 1946 elections, during the British time, religious parties could not win a single seat. So there has been a consistency as far as the Muslim voters are concerned. They don't think that mullahs should rule them. Mullahs' rule, in their view, is to basically perform religious duties, not to rule them. And this division has been there for centuries. In our villages, very traditional villages, the local imam, the local religious leader, is not allowed even to sit in the village panchayat. We call it panchayat. Panchayat means panch means five. So, and ayat is basically the council of the fives. Mullah is not part of that. He's considered an employee of the community. So this transformation which has happened after the jihad, because when you use them for your foreign policy objectives, they thought they can also rule. So this started happening in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa after that. The Malaks were head of, Malak is a title, who is considered head of a village. So Malaks were replaced by mullahs, and the state and the international community helped this transformation. And now we have to undo it. So I think we had been secular for centuries. And this so-called Islamization is not going to succeed. That's my view.
Because people don't trust them, or they
Because
don't want to be enforced?
People don't trust them, and people, because the village, of course in cities, things have changed because Saudi Arabia gave so much money. In 1980, when Afghan Jihad started, we had only few hundred madrasas. Now we have 23,000 madrasas. And all these madrasas are getting money from Middle East. But also Hillary Clinton Foundation is also getting money from the same source.
From the Saudis.
So
Yeah. We'll talk about Hillary later. One more question. I'm sorry, I don't mean to. I'm still intrigued about, and Ali also maybe you can help me with this. if you're going to go into a village and empower women, you also have to negotiate with the men. You know, if you're going in and saying, I'm gonna provide vocational training for women, you would have to talk to the men first.
Well,
I mean, you know, it's a bargaining, I mean,
young
I
people,
can't imagine how me, if I were Pakistani in an NGO, I'm gonna go into a village and say, I'm gonna do a vocational program for women in your village. And people are gonna say, great. Or they're gonna say, no, you're not. Yes, yes, Ali, I'm sorry.
Because Pakistan is still a male-dominating society overall. So I think yes. First of all, when you go to work, then you have to negotiate with the men because they would like to know what we are going to talk to them. Because thing is that they still don't want. They think women are their properties and they don't want them to be empowered. They feel just threatened. They have someone to oppress. So they really would like to know the agenda, why we are having a meeting with them, what is it we are going to talk to them. So it's still there. So you have to build that trust with men. So you're not only working with women, usually on the project where we say we are working with women, we are not working with women, we are also working with men as well. So you need to work with them, tell them what is happening, and then they let you have this meeting with women. And when those men have trust on you, gradually they think, oh yes, this is going to benefit them in a long term, to the community, to the men, to their families as well. So things have changed in few villages, like we have experienced there were women, those who have never traveled outside their villages, in a 60 years time they were born there, married there, in a 60 years time they have never left their villages, but then we took them from their village to 700 kilometers away to protest or to take a part in training, to take a part in conference. And then there were times where men and women, the men who have never traveled with their families, because men usually they don't like taking families into other areas, to the cities. So they brought their families, their women, their sisters, wives, everyone along in a protest. They were sitting on the road. So things are changing, but yes, still women are not empowered to make their own decisions. They could argue, they could protest in a family. So family structure is still there in the new level.
but it also depends on if they are very poor, they are more open. The poorer they are, the more open they are.
The poorer they are, the more open they are?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they allow their women. But if you are rich, you are well off, you can afford to hire outside labor. But if you are dependent on women's labor as well, like your woman has to work, then they are more open to outside help because they are desperate for help, and that is the entry point.
But within the relationship of men and women, the permission is still there.
Yeah,
The concept of permission is still there. So they're not independent, they don't have freedom, they could do the things on their own.
See, we would think that the rural area is so incredibly conservative that it would change, but you're saying just the opposite. Which is our experience. People are desperate, they're poor, I'm gonna provide job training for someone. Women or men, people are going, at the rural area, they'll allow it. Question, yes?
I guess my question, and maybe you already answered it, is like, is feminism or empowering women, can it coexist with traditional Islam?
Or just Islam?
Or Islam? Or just Islam?
Yeah.
Well, there's a very strong feminist movement, which is Islamic feminism. So they have taken over the feminist movement because and it started from a very well-off woman. She established Al-Huda. Now she has hundreds of thousands of women, but you will not find any poor women member of Al-Huda. These are women who are very rich. They have free time. But they are not taking any position on social issues. But they are now interpreting that we are also feminists, that we are Islamic feminists. course, it depends because there are a lot of streams within feminism. We have radical feminism, and we have Islamic feminism. So it depends because like Jamaat-e-Islami, who is considered a modernist religious party. It doesn't believe that women should be sitting at home. They believe that women should come out, women should work, but within the limits of decided by Islam. They have a following among the university-going women. They have membership among working women as well. But they preach Islam all the time. So these modernist religious parties are quite clever. They keep on adopting these discourses and also trying to show that we are modernist as well. Like there are two things. One set of religious parties are Hizb ut-Tahrir, which does not believe in democracy at all. It says that the democracy is a Western, it's infidel, and we should only have a Khilafah. Because Khalifa is not elected. He is selected amongst the pious leaders. So we don't need to go for vote. This is Western. Once the pious people select a leader, then every Muslim has a right to follow him. And whoever would oppose him should be punished. But Jamaat-e-Islami and other parties don't agree with them. They still believe that we have to follow this democratic path. We have to go to the people. People should vote. If they don't vote for us, we should accept it. So similarly, this Islamic feminist movement is part of the modernist version of the Islamicist approach. But the Hizb ut-Tahrir is completely opposite to that. So they are creating or trying to capture space wherever it is available. So in that way, they are quite pragmatic. So there is no homogeneity because when we say Islamicist, it means that every Islamicist is same or similar. It's like a long time the West looked at communists from single angle, while the Soviets were different, Chinese were different. So even now, a lot of Western scholars and the government tend to look at Islamicists from the same angle, which is problematic, because you are then unable to differentiate between them. And for public policy, you need to make these differentiations, and that's very, very important to deal with different groups. Now, Hizb ut-Tahrir is taking a very extremist line on democracy, but Hizb ut-Tahrir completely opposed to terrorism. Those modernist parties who are in favor of democratic process, they tend to preach extremism. So it's very important to understand these similarities and differences between the Islamicist discourse.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. Okay. I want to thank audience for coming. And, actually, as you know, it's my guest, and I'm putting them to work, so I apologize for this. But at 3 o'clock, Adele will be talking.